Hello everyone and welcome to today's WorkSafe Tasmania Month webinar, Better Safe Building a High Trust Culture in the Workplace. I'm Stephanie Borowski from WorkSafe Tasmania, your moderator for today's webinar. Before we start, we ask that you take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I'll now run through how you can participate in today's webinar. Please use the questions window on your control panel to type and submit questions at any time during the presentation. Questions will be addressed by the presenters at the end of today's webinar. Only presenter webcams will be used today, and then finally, today's webinar is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenters, Dr. Kieran Holm and Valerie Matsumoto. Dr. Holm is a psychologist and presenter. Valerie is an Innovation and Service Co-ordinator. Both are from Positive Solutions. Kieran provides counselling to workers referred through employee assistance programs. Valerie leads and facilitates mediation and employee assistance program services. Welcome, Kieran and Valerie.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's really nice to be here, and thanks so much to everyone who's watching.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just start by telling you a little bit about us to begin with. So Positive Solutions is a Tasmanian not-for-profit organisation that was established 30 years ago. We offer a range of services in the mediation and counselling space, and we have a range of workplace services. So for instance, like Stephanie mentioned just before, the employee assistance program, but we also offer workplace support, training, supervision, critical incidents management, conflict coaching, and workplace mediation. So today we'll be discussing some of the ways we can develop positive workspaces in order to reduce the risk of harm to employees' wellbeing. We'll be discussing how we can identify potential hazards in the workplace, so in particular risks to the psychological safety of workers. We'll look at examining how these hazards can harm people's wellbeing, as well as some of the costs of these hazards to organisations. And we'll take a look at the how and why of investing in structural and cultural change in workplaces. And we'll also discuss how values of compassion, curiosity and creativity can be implemented in the workplace in order to lead a transformation of workplace culture. So organisations are required to provide a safe work environment for all staff, and according to current legislation, organisations have a duty of care to ensure the health and the safety of workers. And this means that an organisation is required to identify hazards and take reasonable steps to minimise and eliminate those hazards. So psychosocial hazards can arise from a range of different factors. There's organisational factors, environmental and individual factors. And this webinar will really be focusing on, I guess, more of the organisational factors that relate to workplace culture. So it's really common for us to think about mainly of physical dangers when we think of work health and safety. But I guess it's also really important to kind of consider those parts of our work that can cause harm to our mental health and wellbeing. And these are really called psychosocial hazards. So generally, the longer that someone's exposed to a psychosocial hazard, the greater the chances of harm. So a really good example of this would be if somebody's exposed to workplace bullying or harassment. But it's also important to recognise that there can be short-term psychosocial hazards as well. So these can be things that kind of happen as a one-off event. So it might be that there's a critical workplace incident that can really impact staff wellbeing. So on this slide, you can see some of the examples of some of the more common psychosocial hazards. So we're looking at things here like the job demand, the clarity of the role, if there's conflict in the workplace. Some other examples are things like fatigue from the work that we do. It might be that we're not really involved in decision making in our workplace. It might be that we're experiencing lower levels of support from management. And like I mentioned before, some other issues that can be seen as psychosocial hazards are things like critical workplace incidents, bullying, harassment, and another issue, which I think is quite a current one, is that idea of a lot of people now working remotely as well, and the challenges that can present us with. The next one. So like physical hazards, psychosocial hazards can negatively impact employees and organisations. So this slide shows some of the ways that psychosocial hazards can have that impact. So if employees are exposed to psychosocial hazards, they're at greater risk of high levels of stress, and they're also at increased risk of psychological injury, which is sort of refers to a diagnosable mental health disorder that is influenced by work-related factors. So for organisations, there's a range of impacts that can be experienced. So these are things like loss of productivity, there can be higher staff turnover, and also an increase in workers' compensation claims. And psychosocial hazards can also lead to issues such as absenteeism and presenteeism. I'll just explain a little bit about what those two terms mean. So absenteeism is really that idea of absence. So when employees are not present at work due to a mental health condition, and the employer is paying the person for not presenting to work. And presenteeism is a little bit different. So that's when a person presents to work, like the name suggests, but they're actually less productive in their role due to their mental health condition. So mental health issues are common in the workplace. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 45% of Australians are estimated to experience a mental health condition during their lifetime. 1 in 5 workers are actually estimated to currently experience a mental health condition. Some of the most common mental health conditions in Australia are anxiety and depression, which tend to occur during a person's working years. And really interestingly, the rates of mental health conditions in employees actually varies according to industry. This slide shows some estimations across industries of the incidence of mental health conditions in Australia. And I think it's really important to mention that there's psychosocial hazards that are specific to certain industries. So for example, in some industries, jobs can be more isolating than others. In the transport industry, for example, drivers may be geographically dispersed. And some work that we might do, such as in the retail industry, can have a lot of pressure that's specific to that role. So it might be work targets that are really difficult to achieve for the staff. And in some industries, such as in legal and healthcare settings, workers are more at risk of developing vicarious trauma through being repeatedly exposed to traumatic material. If you're interested, please feel free to share some of your ideas in the chat feature with Stephanie about other psychosocial hazards that you might consider would relate to certain industries. And also, please feel free to share any thoughts you have on why some of the industries that we've listed on this slide might actually have a high estimation of mental health conditions in those industries. Really interested to hear your thoughts. So why focus on improving mental wellbeing in the workplace? We can answer this question by considering the idea of return on investment, which is a term that really refers to the financial benefits of an organisation's investment in a particular service. Organisations can gain significant financial benefits when they take action to develop a mentally healthy workplace. There's actually been some Australian research that suggests that organisations gain quite a bit actually from creating mentally healthy workplaces. So an average of $2.30 in benefits for every dollar that is spent, which I thought was a pretty amazing finding. Some of the financial benefits of creating mentally healthy workplaces, as you might expect, are things like reduced absenteeism, reduction in presenteeism, and also a reduction in workers' compensation claims. I wanted to mention there's a really useful online tool at headsup.org.au, which we'll provide a link to at the end of the webinar. And that can be used to actually calculate the estimated return on investment for an organisation that invests in developing a mentally healthy workplace. So it's called the Heads Up ROI tool, and it's really user-friendly. You can select an industry and size of an organisation, and then it provides you with the estimated financial costs to the organisation due to absenteeism, presenteeism, and compensation claims. And it also provides the expected financial benefits to the organisation if the organisation were to invest in creating a mentally healthy workplace. So I'm going to talk briefly about a model called the Smart Work Design model, which was developed by Professor Sharon Parker at the Centre for Transformative Work Design. So this model contains 5 key characteristics that relate to psychosocial aspects of risk and can be used as a way for us to kind of, I guess, consider how we can reduce psychosocial hazards in the workplace and to think a little bit about our own, I guess, personal values in the workplace as well. So the 5 work characteristics according to this model are stimulating, mastery, agency, relational, and tolerable. So stimulating is really referring to when employees have variation in the tasks that they perform, as well as when they have interesting and meaningful tasks. Mastery refers to the knowledge that employees have of their role and their understanding of how they're going about performing their role. Agency is really about the control that employees have of their role and the control employees have over their tasks, and includes having a say over work-related decisions. And relational is referring to the importance of connection and support in the workplace. So it might be looking at things like getting along with our peers, receiving support from supervisors. And tolerable refers to having reasonable demands at work that employees can manage and are not too overwhelming for them. So in today's webinar, we'll be focusing on how curiosity, compassion, and creativity can be developed in the workplace. And this means we'll be kind of focusing specifically more on these 2 characteristics of the SMART model, which are stimulating and relational. So many of the characteristics identified by the SMART work design model on the previous slide can be related to workplace culture. Culture of an organisation is really the written and unwritten rules of an organisation. The norms, values, and behaviours that the employees share and demonstrate. A positive work culture helps employees thrive and can actually really shape the reputation that an organisation has. Developing a safe and healthy work culture has been found to significantly reduce psychosocial hazards in the workplace. We can use survey tools to get a sense of the culture of an organisation and staff wellbeing and perceptions. And one example of such a tool is the Thrive at Work survey tool. And this tool is a reliable and validated assessment measure developed by organisational psychologists, and it can be used to get an understanding of staff perceptions and also to identify psychosocial hazards, some of those things we were talking about earlier. You can access some information about the tool at the Thrive at Work website, and we'll also provide the URL at the end of the webinar. So now I'll introduce you to Valerie, who will be speaking with you a little bit about the values of compassion, curiosity, and creativity in the workplace.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks. So how do we engineer, grow and sustain positive work culture that allows us to manage psychosocial injury and to preempt psychosocial injury? The neuroscience of trust tells us that compassion, curiosity and creativity create opportunities for connection, increasing oxytocin in the brain and driving performance. So the definition of compassion, the recognition of the suffering of others and a desire to alleviate their predicament, is distinct from the definition for empathy, which lacks the element of action or the drive to do something to assist others out of their suffering. Curiosity is a state of increased arousal response promoted by a stimulus high in uncertainty and lacking in information. Creativity can be described as use of the imagination or original ideas to solve problems, communicate with others, and entertain ourselves. Creativity is ideas turned into outcomes. So how do these fluffy sounding beasts fit into the stable of workplace, and how can we put them to good use in the prevention of psychosocial injury? Compassion, suffering together. What does a compassionate workplace look and feel like? Employees are more likely to be engaged, dedicated and loyal, and cultivate positive interpersonal relationships. Individuals work for the benefit of the whole organisation and not just for salary or personal gain. Motivation to achieve organisational targets increases in proportion to genuine engagement. So the benefits are increased employee retention, stress reduction, increased availability, physical well-being, and stronger interpersonal bonds leading to more positive team dynamics. PositivePsychology.com actually has quite a lot of information about these benefits if you want to have a look at the link provided on the slide. So how do we put compassion into action? A Seattle wealth management firm, Brighton Jones, created a unique position, Director of Compassion. The successful candidate's full-time role is to strengthen relationships in the workplace, driving productivity and staff engagement. How do we prioritise compassion as a value? Choosing it as a value in our workplace can feed into refining codes of conduct, and amending rules for flexibility when employees are struggling. Champion kindness and encouragement, and add compassion as a standing agenda item to regular meetings, feedback, and group projects. Compassion starts with the self. Encourage discussion about self-compassion. Train leaders in compassionate behaviour. There's a Harvard Business Review compassion test that you can take to see how you rate in that regard. Non-judgmental, authentic conversations lead us to more robust exchanges. You can put more of yourself in there. Compassion leads to clarity. It's inevitably easier to have difficult conversations at work when our relationships are based on respect. The philosopher and early psychologist William James described curiosity as the impulse towards better cognition. The psychology and neuroscience of curiosity explores drivers for curiosity and found that in problem-solving situations, people are more likely to be curious where they have a degree of familiarity with the subject matter and just enough information to pique their interest. Curiosity is described as the wick in the candle of learning, activating reward circuitry in the brain and enhancing memory. Curiosity leads to creativity and competence. Employees working in highly structured environments such as call centres who showed higher curiosity levels are more likely to seek information from a wide number of colleagues, leading them to build a flexible skill set with better creative problem solving to address client concerns. Curiosity leads to less errors. When we work as curious teams or curious individuals, we are less likely to default to confirmation bias, i.e., looking for information that supports our beliefs. Curiosity is inclusive. Inclusivity is a byproduct of curiosity, enabling people to speak up and contribute. Curiosity creates resilience to change. Curiosity creates an environment where change is both anticipated and welcomed, creating a growth mindset. So how do we grow curiosity in the workplace? 70% of Australian workers surveyed in a Queensland survey said that they hesitated to ask questions at work. So consider how your workplace regards curiosity. Is it considered to be inefficient and risky, or an opportunity for change? Hire for curiosity. Ask questions at interview that require candidates to demonstrate their curiosity. Be genuinely curious in your own interactions. Model curiosity at every interaction. Ask open questions. Be inquisitive and comfortable with being challenged. People like us more and, contrary to popular belief, see us as competent when we ask questions. Value research and reflection. Focus on learning goals rather than performance goals. Make learning the goal. A body of research demonstrates that framing work around learning goals, developing competence, acquiring skills, mastering new situations, and so on, rather than performance goals of hitting targets, proving our competence, impressing others, boosts motivation. And when motivated by learning goals, we acquire more diverse skills and do better at work. Create opportunities and time for employees to broaden their interests. Training and education in any field encourages cross-pollination of approaches. Allocation of time to pursue further study, even in an unrelated area, leads to deeper engagement with work and at work. Pose curious questions. Behavioural scientist Francesco Gino conducted a study with 200 employees across various industries. Twice a week for 4.5 weeks, employees received a morning text asking them to identify one topic or issue that they were curious about, to ask about one thing they usually take for granted, and to ask some why questions in the course of their day. After 4 weeks, they were evaluated and scored highly on contributing to constructive solutions to organisational problems. Creativity is intelligence having fun. Research around the 6 attributes of positive and healthy workplace culture includes creativity as a foundational element. Behaviours aligned with values are the most powerful determinants for change. Is creativity one of the values of your workplace? Creativity sets us up to solve complex problems that benefit policies, products and productivity and service delivery. Risk-averse attitudes to innovation limit creativity and impact negatively on people's sense of empowerment. So how do we implement creativity in the workplace? Set the stage for brainstorming. Create opportunities for ideas to be explored. Don't evaluate too quickly and don't settle for just one option. Allocate time in the work schedule for people to work on projects. Not all productive brainstorming takes place in team meetings. Consider giving space to people to work alone or in small groups. Encourage individuality. Embrace individuality in terms of personal diversity and also the need to work independently. Not all creative concepts come from group work. Some people prefer to work solo on aspects of a project. Make space for this and allow individuals to take carriage of projects rather than defaulting to the team leader. Provide a stimulating atmosphere. Changing routines or providing a different space to work out ideas in can lead to innovation. Try holding a meeting outside. Facilitate anonymous suggestions. Having a suggestion box to address and implement suggestions is a practical suggestion. People will stop contributing if the ideas are not acknowledged, so there needs to be a mechanism to actually respond to those ideas. Act on and acknowledge good ideas at all times. Respond to and acknowledge where ideas have come from, even when they land in a different project. Diverse teams cross-pollinate. Look for diversity in teams and leadership. Difference in personal and functional presentation leads to greater creativity. So just to summarise, psychosocial hazards are the parts of the work that we do that can cause harm to our mental health and well-being, as Kieran has put forward. A positive work culture reduces psychosocial hazards, helps employees thrive, and shapes the reputation and the potential of an organisation. Compassion, curiosity, and creativity are important aspects of positive work culture that can be cultivated in any organisation. And just to say that we could have chosen any number of ways to look at positive work culture, but in our own experience, these three elements, compassion, curiosity, and creativity, are great drivers of change and sustained well-being in the workplace. For further information, as Kieran mentioned before, we've put some links here to organisations that have helpful evaluative and information sites. So Thrive at Work have a toolkit that can be used by organisations to evaluate their current mental health practices and develop a mental health and wellbeing strategy and action plan. It's a great practical resource. Safe Work Australia also have a useful article on how employers can meet their duties in relation to work-related psychological health and safety. Work-related psychological health and safety, a systematic approach to meeting your duties. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Yes. Any questions?
Right, so thank you, Kieran and Valerie. So we will now answer any audience questions that are coming through. So earlier, Kieran and Valerie, a comment came through saying direct, vicarious and cumulative trauma amongst correction staff. I'm not sure if you want to make any comment in relation to that.
Definitely, I think that's a really important point. So I think that's a really good example of a significant issue that a lot of correctional staff would face. I think I really just gave a few broad examples. I think I mentioned medical and legal settings, but kind of I think the more you kind of sort of look into it, you find that there's vicarious trauma experienced by people in just a range of different industries. So I guess if you're thinking about like hospital settings, but also like private kind of healthcare settings, as well as yeah, a whole range of legal settings. For example, correctional officers might be people in security positions as well. But yeah, there's a whole range. I think that's a really, really good point. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kieran. A question, how do you affect the culture from lower levels? How do you impress the importance of the 3 C's upwards to leadership?
So in terms of that question, I guess I need to understand a little bit more about what's being asked there. Is it that, say, a manager is looking to embed that in the culture from within a team rather than it being driven from above, from the higher level of management? Or is it individuals in a team?
A comment has come through, and I believe it's connected. So it was mentioned that including curiosity into the interview process is beneficial. Do you have an example or provide insight into how to best implement this into the interview?
Yeah, so depending on the industry that you work in the industry that we work in, then we would provide a fairly complex scenario with a number of elements in there that we will ask the person to problem solve in the interview. And we've found that that gives us a really good indicator, not only of that person's skills, but the kind of questions that they ask around what they may not know in that situation, which gives a great indication of their drive to actually understand more about the role.
All right, thanks, Valerie. Another question, what about when allowing people to be creative comes at the expense of other employees? Sometimes spending time on being creative can affect other employees negatively and don't get the job done.
I think, like anything, there needs to be a balance in those matters. And I don't think that perhaps one person being given time and space to work on a particular project in a creative way is going to create harmony within a team or productivity. So it's something where inclusivity is really important there. So, for example, if you have a project that you're working on, that you identify clearly the areas that people will contribute to so that others aren't left out. And creativity is not just ideas. Creativity is only creativity when it translates into action and an outcome. So there need to be timelines and there need to be a clear indication of how people will work within those.
All right, thanks, Valerie. Another question, how would you go about shifting to a positive work culture? How do you start? How would you move forward when management disagree?
That's the eternal question, isn't it? And as a workplace mediator, I often have that question posed to me. And I think that change happens in small steps. So I think one of the dangers is to just keep on doing what you're doing. I think that people are led by their values, and values translate into behaviour and into action. So if you feel that management are not agreeing, it may be that you're not being heard. So I think it's really important to actually draw a space to set your voice forward in terms of your values and how that translates into action in the workplace and how that will translate into better outcomes. Often leadership are interested in outcomes, and so if you can pose it from that perspective as well as one of the elements of change, then I think that you can't fail to be successful there. But it does take time and it is a team effort.
I guess also I might just add that kind of like I was talking about earlier about the return on investment, sometimes drawing attention to management about those kind of financial benefits and just and the general impact on organisations in a positive way. Investment in a positive work culture could go a really, really long way to sort of helping push that through.
I think that's good to have that research, and I think you said $2, was it $2.30 for every dollar invested was the financial outcome.
All right, thank you, Kieran and Valerie. Another question, how would you feel would be the best way as an employee would be to approach management to implement more of these ideas in the workplace for a better workplace culture?
Okay. I think it's really important to start with drawing the team together so that you're not a lone voice within your team. So again, to come back to values, leading behaviour, so that you, along with your teams, come up with the way that you would like to have input into the organisation as a whole and how that you think that will benefit everybody in the broader sense. So I think you have to organise your ideas, draw your colleagues together and put forward how that will translate into outcomes. And also what you expect from or anticipate or hope for from management in order to come alongside their values and their goals as well. There are some processes, and actually I think in the links, one of the resources that we gave that has given a good 6-step process to looking at work culture and improving work culture.
So Safe Work Australia has some really useful information on this kind of topic. So they've actually got a model code of practice for managing risks to health and safety. So more from a manager's kind of perspective. So that's available on the Safe Work Australia website, which might be useful to answer that question. And they have some general information about risk management processes as well. So identifying hazards, assessing risks, controlling them, and reviewing control procedures, but in a lot more detail. Yeah, so that might be a useful kind of resource to look into if you're interested in further information.
Thank you, Kieran and Valerie. Question: in an environment where work is quite repetitive in nature, how can we achieve the 3 C's? Do you have any advice, please?
Yes, I think that's a great question, because when I was thinking about the reality of this for some workplaces where that's the case, I looked into some research around call centres and how they're operated, because they're a great example where there are high pressures and a very repetitive and structured environment. So again, that was about looking at interview from an employer's perspective about identifying attributes of curiosity. They didn't mention creativity and compassion, but there's no reason why you couldn't work those into the workplace culture if that's something that you wanted to be a driver. It might also be looking at productivity over time with those, because people aren't necessarily more productive in those environments. They tend to be, according to the research, more productive when they've actually been given an opportunity to take more breaks or to look at better ways of engineering the work environment. So I think it is about making space within those team environments, not just about hitting targets, but about how do we do this in a more efficient way. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Valerie. A question: what is the research that this methodology discussed today is based on?
In terms of creativity and compassion and curiosity, it's drawn from various parts of research. But I think it was more in terms of reflecting on what we see coming in the EAP space, the Employee Assistance Program space, in terms of the kind of conflict that we see within workplaces, with people looking for ways where methodologies maybe have let them down to actually refresh the workplace and try to find ways to engineer healthier workspaces.
Thank you, Valerie. Another question: suppose managers and leadership don't display qualities that have been mentioned. How do you influence upwards and change the culture from a low-level position?
I've certainly had that experience myself. Do you want to speak to that at all, Kieran?
I think
Okay. So in my personal experience, it's been to put that and request for that to be a standing agenda item on team meetings, so that it's something that doesn't go away, because we're often at a low level asked to contribute to team meetings, and you can either take that as an opportunity to sit there and think about what you're going to do during the day, or you can genuinely say, there's part of this work culture that I would like to look at and I would like to see happen differently or to manufacture differently. And I found that that's a really good space to start, because those are minuted and there's an expectation that they will be actioned. And I feel that that kind of positivity breeds on itself. And I've seen great success in putting not just the 3 C's, but other aspects of practice or values on the work agenda, and then that becomes either a weekly or a monthly revisiting of those and how they've been implemented. And generally those can be fed up to management as an example of what people are actually looking for. And I've had success in moving across different teams in an organisation to actually seek information about other people being interested in those particular qualities, and found that they're actually quite catchy. You know, people are interested in those as leading values. And I think because it's a different approach, we're not talking necessarily about just specific work skills, but those being the values of the organisation. I find that people find those quite compelling and are willing to actually contribute to them when they understand how they might go into different work practice.
I think also just to add to that, if somebody feels uncomfortable about sort of bringing up issues like that in an agenda or in a team meeting, it might be for that person really trying to think about who they can approach that they feel comfortable with in the workplace that might have some kind of influence or decision-making ability. So, you know, in my personal experience, if there's been something I've been a little bit, you know, like wanting to see happen maybe, or something I'm a little bit concerned about or come across, I would usually personally bring that up with my immediate supervisor if I felt that there was a dynamic where they were open to that kind of idea, and then it might kind of move a bit further up through the organisation from there as well. So I think both approaches can definitely be useful.
All right, thanks, Kieran and Valerie. Just to let everyone know as well, we have gone over the scheduled half hour for this session. However, we will keep going. We do have a few more questions to get through. So another question, Kieran and Valerie, do you have any tips on getting management to adopt the culture described? That you acknowledge that it is important in management meetings and spruik it in newsletters and team meetings, but revert back to a command and control management, dulling engagement, etc.
I guess it's about taking responsibility to keep those principles alive and to keep them relevant. And I think that there's a little bit of caution around engineering something like that, because it can feel a little bit clunky using those words. So you need to find the drivers in your workplace. I also think that listening to what people put forward grievance about is a really good start. So what is it that they're feeling is not working for them? And then actually turning that into suggestions for change. And I mentioned before having a suggestion box. So I think a suggestion box is a really good neutral space to start with that. But once, if you're within a team and you're interested in changing culture, I think once you have a sense of what it is that people want and who the champions are within the team who are actually got the energy and the drive to bring that into being, then you've actually got a really positive team working from within. I also think that management themselves do suffer from set and forget. And there's nothing like the dullness of coming to work thinking you know exactly what you're going to be doing and you're going to be taking the same approach. I don't think anybody actually wants that for their life. That's my experience of working with managers as well. So I actually think it's about perhaps people remembering what's important and bringing that to the attention of management is sometimes a bit of a gift.
Thank you. Another question, if you're stuck in a workplace with a negative culture, what can you do?
Well, I guess we've talked about a few things that you can do. And I guess I would ask people to look at what is it about the culture that's negative, and how you yourself, when you walk through the door, contribute to that by inaction or by joining in the negative voice, which is a very, very delicious and enticing thing to do when it is a difficult workplace. I think that we have an obligation, once our consciousness is raised that things aren't as great as they could be, to be the driver of that change. But it does take a little bit of courage to be that person. But I think it's about being the voice that turns it from grievance into actually opportunity, and also remaining hopeful that things can change. Because what we see is that if people have tried that and it hasn't succeeded, then they've learned something from it, and they generally move on to a workplace where they feel valued or where they feel they can drive those values.
Thank you, Valerie. How do we keep a good work culture during the current situation with the pandemic?
I think that's a really good question, and very relevant to what's happening at the moment for a lot of workers. I think really we actually developed a bit of a fact sheet on this kind of idea, a bit of a resource for the idea of working from home and how it can really impact our mental health as well, and just our overall feelings of positivity, I guess. So I think one of the things to really consider is that idea of being able to kind of keep in touch with our colleagues and our supervisors remotely, whether that's via phone or through like a video chat kind of feature. It might be about actually checking in a little bit more regularly. So if, for instance, you had previously had a supervision session once every 2 weeks or a month, it might actually be about having a little bit more, a bit less time between those sessions. So there's a bit more frequent, I guess, contact. So I think that's probably a good place to start. But also, I guess, ideas around just making sure that we look after our own well-being while we're working from home or working remotely. So it might be about making sure we we look after our lifestyle, that we have a bit of a balance in the things that we do, that we're not overworking, that we're kind of got a bit of a schedule or even some alarms set to be able to help us kind of move from work to a home environment at the end of the day. So yeah, I think a few things like that can go a really, really long way. But definitely, I think really that importance of connection with colleagues and keeping in touch with them just in a different kind of way to how we might have before in an office space.
I think too that there were, the Tasmanian experience has been a little bit different, but certainly there were people who benefited from working from home, and there were some positives in that as well. Stephanie, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Kieran and Valerie. What is the flip side of the ROI? How much would it hinder if the money isn't utilised?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't really have the answer to that. I think because you'd be looking at some statistics, I would suggest probably going to headsup.org.au, and they've got a lot of really interesting information on that. There's also Thrive at Work have a survey that has a lot of really interesting information. Let's see if I can find it. So it's called the Indicators of a Thriving Workplace Survey. So it's a national report from 2018, and yeah, that might be a useful thing to look into as well.
All right, thank you. Question, what words or topics would you add to a monthly meeting agenda?
I think it really depends on what you actually want to change, what's missing there. So I know that in some of the research that I did, that compassion was put on the agenda once people had a familiarity with that word and realised that it was a word of action, not something kind of remote and benevolent. So it could be a good start there. I think curiosity is a great thing to put on your workplace agenda, because it actually asks you then to engage. What is it that you're curious about? What is it that you want to add to in the workplace? What is it that you want to change? And I think I'm a great person for doing polls in the workplace. What are the things that people would like to see go on the agenda? So perhaps you can create a bit of a survey in your workplace to see what's missing there. I also think it's a
All right.
great idea in meetings to share the load so that people get to contribute to those ideas rather than one person being the holder of the agenda.
Thank you, Valerie. Another question. What about when you know what you want culturally, but not how to get there? And when you suggest it to management, they ask you to go away and make suggestions on how to achieve it.
I think if you know what you want, then it has to be something that has included the capacity that your team has, or that you then need to grow that capacity within the team. So I think that those are two different things to reflect on. If you are looking to grow a culture of engagement or positivity, then obviously you need to model that, and you need management to model that as well. So there needs to be a good bridge between those two spheres of management. I think that it is about incrementally increasing that, but it's also engaging the team in how that would look if you want to implement a new idea or you want to change work culture. But ultimately it starts with the person with that idea, and then recruiting some mentors or some champions within the team.
Thank you, Valerie. Are there any tips for a workplace where staff have given up on making suggestions as they know that no change will come from it?
I think the tips for that would go to management. What is it that benefits the workplace to have a team that stops asking questions? What's your level of presenteeism like? Because people will disengage if they're not stimulated. And then we end up with a culture where people are seen as lazy or deadwood or doing the minimum. So I think as managers, as in people in positions of leadership, we've actually got a moral obligation to engage with people on a daily level to make sure that they are feeling heard, that they're feeling valued, that they feel that their work has actual meaning. That
Thank you,
cannot be
Valerie.
changed. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have one final question. Are there any management courses that help with these issues within the workplace and strategies to implement within the workplace?
That's a really good question. I know that there will be, and I'm aware that, for example, Amavita has a management course that's pretty minimally able to be attended. So it's about neurological. Sorry, I'm forgetting my words here. The neuroscience of leadership. And I think that that's a really good one to start with, because it actually looks at how do we make change and what's happening in the brain when we do that, and how do we lead through our awareness. It's quite a creative approach, but I think that there are many, many others, and I'd be happy to go and look at some more. Did you have any to add to that, Kieran?
I don't think any specifically. But I'm sure there must be some out there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you, Dr. Kieran Holm and Valerie Matsumoto, both from Positive Solutions. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Better Safe, Building a High Trust Culture in the Workplace. At the close of today's webinar, you will receive a survey. We do appreciate you providing us with your feedback. Today's webinar has also been recorded and will be made available on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page. Finally, to find out more about Tasmania's WorkSafe Month and other services funded by the WorkCover Tasmania Board, delivered by WorkSafe Tasmania, please head to the WorkSafe Tasmania website. And on behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and the WorkCover Tasmania Board, thank you for joining us.